I am 65 years old, but some days I feel as though I've lived through 3 lifetimes. I came to the city reluctantly, trading the comforting dampness of my Carolina garden for the harsh geometry of glass and concrete, all to retire and live near my son, Marcus. I thought it was a sensible compromise, aging gracefully with hospitals and conveniences close at hand. Instead, I found myself imprisoned by a new, unsettling rhythm. Every single night, precisely at 3 o'clock, the shower would start. The sound was visceral, almost violent. Water roared through the pipes embedded in the wall behind my headboard, loud enough to suggest someone wasn't merely bathing, but attempting to wash away the very darkness of the night itself. One frigid, sleepless night, my instinct for self-preservation collided with an overwhelming, irrational curiosity. I crept from my bed, the silence of the luxury apartment amplifying the frantic deluge behind the wall. What I glimpsed through the narrow gap of the partially open bathroom door didn't just frighten me, it froze me to my core, stealing the very breath from my lungs. The next morning, before the city had fully awakened, I packed my single suitcase and quietly departed. No argument, no lengthy discussion, just a swift, necessary retreat to a private assisted living facility. The kind of escape you make when you abandon a house after the undeniable cold has settled deep into its bones. Before this gilded prison, my life had unfolded in the quiet predictability of our small Carolina town. Late autumn there would cling to the window panes like a persistent chill, a dry, biting cold that slipped beneath the painted sills. Our modest old house, with its charmingly carved trim, had witnessed every chapter of my existence: a young high school English teacher, a weary widow, and finally a woman whose hands, now lightly spotted and threaded with silver, still automatically reached to straighten curtains and set the kettle to boil, performing rituals perfected over decades. On the mantelpiece stood a photograph of my late husband, forever frozen in his rigid, imposing stance. Even in death, his eyes seemed to demand obedience. When I looked at that stern face, two conflicting emotions always intertwined: a deep pity for the life cut short, and a quiet, profound relief that I no longer had to anticipate the heavy, demanding echo of his footsteps in the hallway. They say discretion demands you speak only kindly of the deceased. But the purple and yellow bruises you meticulously concealed beneath thick foundation, and the scathing words that cut sharper than any leather belt, they don't simply vanish when the casket closes. They merely retreat into a cold, dark corner of your memory, waiting for something to trigger their return. He had been a rough, domineering man who viewed both Marcus and me as his personal property. Our salvation, ironically, arrived on the day we received two contrasting pieces of news. We learned his cancer was too advanced for surgery, and simultaneously, a crisp acceptance letter arrived for Marcus from a prestigious state university. In that moment, I buried all my accumulated anger and hurt, performing my wifely duties out of sheer obligation, not love. I knew I had to maintain the facade, caring for him until the end so that Marcus could begin, and more importantly, continue, his education without disruption. When his eyes finally closed forever, I felt nothing resembling grief. There was only the immense physical sensation of something impossibly heavy finally lifting from my shoulders, something that had constricted my breathing for 20 years. It was just the two of us then, mother and son, and I poured every ounce of my energy into lifting him up, believing his success would justify all my sacrifices. I taught classes, graded papers late into the night, took on extra translation work, and many dinners consisted of nothing more than tea and dry crackers. It was an agonizing marathon. Marcus was brilliant and driven, but his temper was quick, inherited, perhaps, and volatile. Whenever his brow furrowed, his jaw clenched, and his voice rose in that sharp, commanding tone, I was instantly overwhelmed by that old primal fear: it's coming now. The storm is starting. Each time, I would gently intervene, talking him through his frustration, diligently working to smooth the sharp, unforgiving edges of his character with patience and understanding. I truly believed he was capable of change. I believed he would turn out right, and for a long time, he didn't disappoint me. He excelled in college, secured a lucrative position at a major corporation, and rapidly climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming a regional manager. He married Simone, a sweet, reserved young woman who moved through the world with quiet grace. We bonded cautiously at first, then genuinely. Now, I thought, looking out over my rows of tomatoes, my quiet old age has finally arrived. I envisioned spending slow mornings in the warm dirt of my vegetable garden and tranquil evenings walking around the pond with neighbors, discussing the weather and the price of gas. I expected life to simply continue, predictably and peacefully. But life, I learned, has a cruel sense of humor when you dare to make plans. I was standing in the vegetable patch, the scent of rich, damp earth heavy on my hands, when the phone rang, shattering the afternoon stillness. "Hey, Mom. What are you up to?" Marcus's voice, even in the simplest greeting, always carried an underlying vibration of urgency and unspoken expectation. I wiped my dirt-stained hands on my apron and offered a wry smile to the empty air. "Just admiring the tomatoes, son. They're nearly ready for picking." "What's the news?" "Simone and I have decided," he announced without preamble. "Pack your things. I'm coming this weekend to bring you to the city. You're going to live with us." The words hit me like a physical blow. I froze. The thought of abandoning the house, the garden, the cool morning mist rising over the river, it made my heart feel like a stone sinking in my chest. "There's no need, Marcus. I'm rooted here. I know this place. I don't know anyone in the city, and frankly, I'll only be in your way. You two are busy with work. I have my garden and my preserves to keep me company." "What exactly is the problem, Mom?" His impatience, thin and sharp, was already evident. "A son takes care of his mother. What if you fall? Who would even know? I've decided. Your room is ready. No arguing." That phrase, "I've decided," struck me with the force of an icy wave. It was the exact proprietary language his father had used. I struggled to maintain my composure, attempting gentle resistance. "Marcus, I'm too old for such drastic changes. I'll miss my friends, my routine, especially my garden. I'll go crazy from loneliness in a high-rise." "Friends? What friends?" he snapped, dismissing my entire social world. "Simone can take you out for walks and to the store." "Hold on. She'll speak to you herself." Then I heard her voice, immediately soothing, warm, and bright, like gentle water washing over chilled hands. "Mom, it's Simone. Please, please come live with us. The apartment is spacious and bright, and we honestly miss you so much. Marcus is genuinely worried about your health. I promise I'll go to the market with you. We can sit and chat, and I'll show you around the neighborhood." It was almost impossible to reject her gentle, well-intentioned kindness. Yet beneath the sweetness, I distinctly recognized a note of submission in her tone. He had made the decision. She was merely extending her hand to cushion the inevitable impact. I was silent for a long, agonizing minute, everything battling within me. On one side, the freedom I had paid for with years of silent suffering. On the other, the heavy obligations of motherhood, my residual love for my son, and the ancient, deeply embedded fear of a man's cold rage, a terror, I realized, that doesn't perish with the abuser but simply transfers itself into your memory, where it stubbornly persists. "All right," I finally conceded, the words feeling small and inadequate. "Give me a couple of days to get my affairs in order." "Wonderful." Simone sounded profoundly relieved. "We'll be there this weekend." I hung up and stood alone in the vegetable patch, listening to the dry autumn wind rattle the dill stalks. Perhaps I'm overcomplicating things, I wondered desperately. Maybe the city really will be easier. They're young, successful, and caring. My son is a grown man. What on earth am I so afraid of? I had little to pack, a few comfortable dresses, a couple of cherished books, and an old cloth-bound photo album. I sat at the kitchen table and flipped through the brittle pages. Here was tiny Marcus, his laughter almost audible, clinging tight to my neck. Here was his first day of kindergarten, overwhelmed by his slightly crooked bow tie. And here he was as a young man, handsome, serious, utterly stubborn. My heart softened with the fierce, protective love only a mother knows. I closed the album, pulled out my sturdy suitcase, and began folding my life into neat, manageable stacks, repeating the mantra, I raised him. I protected him. He's calling me. This must be right. That evening I made the rounds, stopping at neighbors' homes, telling them I was likely moving to be closer to my children. I listened to their genuine well-wishes and quiet farewells, smiling weakly but steadily. Then I retreated to my window seat and waited for the inevitable weekend to arrive. Marcus arrived promptly that Saturday in a sleek black Cadillac Escalade, its polished finish gleaming under the Carolina sun. He stepped out in a razor-sharp suit, flashing the confident, quick smile of a successful man accustomed to getting his way, and immediately began directing the move. Bags, blankets, my precious jars of homemade preserves, the old books, the album, all were swiftly loaded. Simone was with him, gentle as ever, moving with quiet efficiency. She was one of those women who spoke softly and worked quickly, always trying to anticipate needs and ensure she was never perceived as a burden. Look, Mom, Marcus said, opening the expansive trunk. I bought you some quality imported vitamins. You need them. I raised my hands in gentle protest. Oh, Marcus, don't waste your money. I have everything I need. He waved his hand dismissively, an arrogant gesture that cut me off mid-sentence. Money isn't the issue, Mom. Time is. I simply need to feel better knowing you're nearby and properly looked after. The highway swallowed us whole, swiftly whisking us away from my home, where the air smelled comfortably of wet earth and bruised apples, toward the sprawling city, where towering canyons of glass and concrete eclipsed the trees. We ascended into an upscale condominium building and rode the silent elevator to the 18th floor. The apartment was cavernous, greeting us with gleaming hardwood floors, heavy, expensive furniture, and a silence so profound it made my ears ring. This is your room, Marcus announced, throwing open the door to a bright, airy bedroom with a window offering a commanding view of a small green park. He placed the air conditioner remote precisely beside the bed and patted the large television screen as if greeting an old companion. If you need anything at all, tell Simone immediately. Thank you, children, I replied, and I meant the gratitude sincerely. They certainly knew how to provide a flawless appearance of care. Simone deftly hung my few dresses in the walk-in closet, made the bed with fresh linens, and carefully arranged my belongings. She kept shooting quick, anxious glances my way, checking if I was tired or in pain. But I noticed that whenever Marcus entered the room, her practiced smile seemed to stretch painfully tight, like an over-taut rubber band, and a tiny, desperate glint of caution sparked deep in her eyes. I averted my gaze. It wasn't that I wished to remain ignorant. It was simply that I didn't yet possess the courage to acknowledge something so sharply familiar. Our first dinner was extravagant, laid out like a holiday feast. Simone had cooked mountains of food, delicate fish fillets, multiple salads, and a huge pot of soup. Marcus dominated the conversation, speaking in rapid, assured bursts about his projects, corporate competition, and his superior strategies for employee motivation, talking as if the very air in the room was listening attentively and nodding in agreement. Eat more, Mom. You're far too thin, he instructed, placing a generous piece of fish onto my plate. I can serve myself, thank you, son, I murmured gently. But he had already pivoted to his wife, his tone flattening into something hard and unmistakable. Simone, what are you doing? Pour Mom some soup. He hadn't raised his voice, but the absence of inflection was an order, pure and cold. Simone flinched, a tiny, involuntary spasm. She quickly grabbed the ladle, and her hand trembled so visibly that the spoon handle gave a light, nervous tap against the bowl's edge. I gave her the quiet, steadying smile that old teachers perfect, calm, supportive, entirely without judgment. Thank you, sweetie. It's absolutely delicious. That night, sleep was elusive. The apartment building itself felt alive, operating on a different frequency. Deep inside the walls, the elevators seemed to breathe like vast sleeping beasts. Outside my window, the headlights of distant cars stretched into shimmering, endless strings, and the city hummed a low, monotonous, pervasive sound right beneath the roofline. I sat up, running my hand over the unfamiliar texture of the heavy comforter, trying desperately to reassure myself. You get used to anything, Evelyn, as long as you maintain your health and your resolve. The first few days did seem fine. In the mornings, after Marcus left for work, Simone would link her arm through mine and walk me carefully to the grocery store. She insisted on carrying all the bags, deferred to my preferences, and continually reminded me, "You're resting today, Mom. That's your only job." Sometimes we'd browse a nearby department store. She'd pick out a cardigan in a soft, creamy color. "This one looks beautiful on you," she'd insist, ignoring my protests that my old, durable clothes were perfectly adequate. In the evenings, Marcus's attention was immediate and focused. "How is your blood pressure, Mom? Are you using the monitor? You must check it morning and night. Simone, ensure you record the numbers in the notebook." He spoke with smooth, meticulous concern, and I felt foolish for my rising weariness, chastising myself for being overly suspicious. I told myself to simply accept the care and settle into this new chapter. Yet the more I observed, the more frequently I caught glimpses of an unbearable tension radiating from Simone. It was the kind of rigidity that a woman who is truly at peace should never possess. I saw the hesitation in her fingers when she carefully set a teacup down. Her eyes would invariably drop to the floor the moment he walked into a room. That quick, bright smile she wore wasn't fake exactly, but it was strained, trying too hard to achieve a specific, placating perfection. I kept silent, choosing caution. We older people, I reasoned, sometimes jump to conclusions too quickly, projecting old fears onto new situations. I was terrified of being wrong, so I chose the safer path. Waiting and watching, the slow, quiet way one waits for the definitive arrival of winter at the end of a long, ambiguous fall. A week passed, then a second. I adjusted to their routine, who departed and returned when, the precise location of the towels, the correct sequence for starting the dishwasher. The city nights began to feel slightly less foreign, and my fitful dreams became a little less fractured. I almost convinced myself that the pervasive anxiety would simply dissipate on its own, like sugar dissolving quietly in tea if you avoid stirring too vigorously. And then it happened again. In the deepest, quietest part of the night, when the entire enormous building seemed to be holding its breath, right at 3 o'clock, the water in the wall next to my bed began its relentless roaring cycle. I had been startled awake earlier by a strange, profound silence, so heavy I could hear the tiny clicking sound of the clock's second hand. Then, precisely at 3, like a dreadful alarm, the water erupted, a solid, powerful, unrelenting noise, as if someone had wrenched the faucet wide open, past its intended limit. "Who is that?" I thought, panicked. "It's the dead of night. Everyone should be sleeping." I lay rigid, listening, paralyzed by the fear of making a sound, of bumping a door or startling whoever was generating this monstrous noise. 15 minutes later, the water stopped as abruptly as it had begun, and the apartment returned instantly to a deep, echoing silence, like a library after closing hours. I tossed and turned, staring out at the few passing headlights, unable to reclaim sleep until the weak gray light of morning. At breakfast, I attempted to appear completely unruffled. "Marcus," I asked casually, keeping my voice light, "were you feeling unwell last night? The water was running around 3. It sounded like someone was taking a shower." He was absorbed in scrolling through news on his phone, not even glancing up. "No, Mom. Just work stress. Couldn't sleep." I got up, took a quick rinse, and went back to bed. "Don't worry about something so insignificant." His tone was completely flat, designed to convey how truly trivial the matter was. Simone, who was bringing the oatmeal bowl to the table, paused for a visible fraction of a second. The spoon nearly clanked against the bowl's ceramic rim. She straightened hastily and smiled, her eyes slightly too wide. Yes, yes, Mom. He works himself too hard. Sometimes he just paces at night. Cooling off helps him settle. I nodded outwardly, accepting the explanation, but I had distinctly noticed that momentary hesitation, and something internal pinched tightly. That wasn't right, I thought, a thread of memory tugging at the edge of my consciousness. 2 subsequent nights, precisely at 3, the water started again, ticking off my escalating anxiety like a dreadful metronome. Soon the nights grew quiet only before 3, and I would lie awake for hours, straining to catch every tiny rustle or clink, listening for the inevitable roar. The broken, anxious sleep left my eyes gritty and shadowed in the mornings. I began to watch my son and daughter-in-law with intensified scrutiny. Marcus maintained his daytime composure, quick, professional, efficient, but deep in his eyes, I saw fatigue coupled with a barely contained irritation that began setting him off faster over small inconveniences. Simone moved around the apartment with forced sweetness, but her gaze consistently sought the floor when he was near. Her hands were always frantically occupied, as if standing still, even for a moment, was too dangerous. I decided I needed to speak to him, woman to man, or rather, mother to son, while it was still possible to resolve the matter solely with words. I chose a moment when Simone was busy in the kitchen and Marcus and I were alone in the vast, quiet living room. "Sit down, son," I instructed, my voice pitched low and steady. "Listen to me calmly. I understand the intense stress of your work, but showering in the absolute middle of the night is not a joke. 3 o'clock is when the human body is at its most vulnerable. You risk catching a severe cold. It's terrible for your heart and your blood pressure. You're young. You have your whole life ahead. You must take care of yourself. You cannot keep doing this." I spoke as a mother, pleading rather than pressuring. His face changed instantly, as if a sharp, cold switch had been flipped inside his head. "Mom," he bit out, his voice razor-sharp, "focus on your own retirement and stay completely out of my business. I will handle myself." He stood abruptly, strode to his room, and closed the door. It wasn't a slam, but it was final, a clear, unmistakable signal that the discussion was terminated. From that moment, the air in the apartment turned thick and heavy. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, his words were short and measured, as if I were a mere stranger or an annoying subordinate. I too fell silent, not out of spite but out of deep-seated caution, because I knew that particular coldness, and I knew it never preceded anything good. And that is when I started watching Simone with focused attention. We were preparing a salad together. She reached up for a basket on a high shelf, and as her sleeve momentarily slipped back, I saw it, a bruise. It was a sickly mix of yellow and deep blue on her wrist, unnaturally shaped, precisely as if powerful fingers had clamped down hard and lingered. I gently took her hand. "Simone, what in God's name is this?" She flinched violently, yanking her sleeve back down. "Oh, Mom, it's nothing. I knocked into the granite countertop. My skin is sensitive. I bruise easily," she stammered, her eyes darting away, her voice hurried and desperate, as if she was trying to physically outrun her own lies. I knew exactly what that mark represented. I knew it too intimately. But forcing her to maintain the lie would only push her deeper into shame and isolation. "Just be careful," I said quietly, releasing her hand. "A woman needs to know how to protect herself." She nodded quickly and slipped out of the kitchen, escaping the scrutiny. A few days later, she appeared for breakfast with eyelids visibly swollen and puffy. When I asked if she hadn't slept well, she offered a flimsy, forced smile. "A mosquito bit me on the balcony last night." On the 18th floor, with fine mesh screens on the windows, I thought bitterly. I maintained my silence. Sometimes words are useless. They only serve to shatter what is already irrevocably cracking. All these small signs kept circling back to the water at 3 a.m. I would recall my past life with vivid, anxious clarity, like a person still huddling in a shawl they discarded years ago. I tried to deny the connection, but deep beneath the denial, all the accumulating thoughts coalesced into one terrible truth, that 3 o'clock shower was no random act. It was a ritual, a purification, a mechanism for something far darker than simply cooling off to sleep. That terrible night, when the water began its sharp, icy, relentless roar again, I couldn't lie still any longer. I sat up in bed, waited a few seconds for the violent pounding of my heart to subside, pulled on my robe, and tiptoed into the hall. A thin strip of brilliant white light escaped from beneath the bathroom door, spilling onto the dark floor. And then, through the sound of the violent water, I heard something else entirely, a short, choked, muffled sob, followed instantly by a low, furious whisper. The bathroom door was not quite closed. There was a gap, perhaps the width of a hand. I drew closer, leaning against the cool wall for support. The white light glared. The water hissed malevolently and evenly, like a relentless January wind ripping through a tiny crack. Suddenly, distinct over the roar, I heard those other sounds again, the brief, stifled sob and the low whisper saturated with cold, undeniable fury. I stopped as if standing on the edge of thin ice, peering through the gap. I saw Marcus. He was fully dressed in his pajamas but already soaking wet, his hair slicked and plastered to his forehead. Standing directly in front of him was Simone, also in her house clothes, completely drenched. The thin fabric clung miserably to her shoulders, molded to her figure as the frigid spray from the shower nozzle poured directly onto her head. I could feel the cold radiating out into the hallway, raising goosebumps on my own skin. The air smelled sharply of metal and the night. He held her hair tightly at the base of her skull, high up like gripping the reins of a horse preparing to bolt. Her head was tilted back at an agonizing angle, her pale neck exposed, and a single thin stream of water traced a path down her collarbone. He was not shouting. He was speaking in that terrifying, low, controlled whisper that seems to vacuum all other sound out of a room. "Open your mouth one more time. Understand." The words dropped heavily into the pooling water on the tile, sounding like pebbles. Then, with sickening suddenness, a sharp, dry, loud slap echoed off the ceramic tile, cutting viciously through the water's noise. Simone's body swayed, her knees visibly buckling, but he didn't release his grip. He yanked her higher, closer to the spray. She released a quiet, choked, muffled sob, the kind of weeping done by a person who understands, bone deep, that they are forbidden to cry out loud. A thin, fragile cord snapped deep inside my chest, the one that had held my voice captive for decades. The air around me became thick and viscous, and my hands felt numb, alien, as I struggled to grasp that this monster was my son, the boy I had raised. Another layer of memory began running independently, simultaneously, the rough, forgotten texture of the old backyard, the cold, rusted rainwater barrel, the harrowing evening my husband, still very much alive then, grabbed my hair exactly the same way and savagely plunged my face into the freezing water. That same blinding white light in my eyes, the choke in my throat, the desperate, useless thrashing of my fingers on the wet, cold metal rim. I heard a gasp, an internal whisper from 30 years past. "Hush! Just don't let the child hear." I did not enter the room. I did not scream. My body reacted for me, operating on an ancient, intact emergency protocol. Run. I backed away silently, returned to my quiet room on tiptoe, closed the door with agonizing care, and utterly collapsed onto the bed. I pulled the heavy comforter up over my head, hiding the way a small, terrified animal instinctually burrows when a predator's shadow falls across the snow. My heart hammered so violently that I truly thought the sound would burst through the blanket barrier and alert the entire corridor. Behind the wall, the water continued to pour, steady and prolonged, becoming the relentless cold soundtrack to our family tragedy. Tears didn't come immediately. First, there was only the terrible, profound coldness that follows severe shock, making my teeth chatter uncontrollably. Then came the crushing shame, not shame for my cowardly retreat, but shame for recognizing in my own son the undeniable face of the other man, the man I believed I had successfully buried alongside the hospital discharge papers and his final breath. I had foolishly believed the demon perished the moment the morgue door slid shut behind his gurney. It hadn't. It had merely found a new host, a body agonizingly familiar, and crossed the threshold. I lay there weeping silently, not just for the drenched, brutalized woman behind the wall, but for my younger, former self. I wept for all those desperate evenings spent with heavy foundation cream, the clumsy, crumpled excuses I invented about falling off a bicycle, the late-night grading sessions with an ice pack pressed hard against my cheek, and most of all, for the small boy I had tried so diligently to save. I had smoothed his rough edges with my palm, constantly whispering the false hope. It will pass. He will come right. He had not come right. When the water finally, blessedly stopped, the ensuing silence was even heavier than before, like a vast bucket full of coal. I lay motionless until the dawn broke. With the first light, thin and colorless as cheap notebook paper, clarity arrived. The kind of stark, unassailable truth that only follows utter devastation. Everything inside me aligned simply, logically, like arithmetic. I realized I could never change Marcus. I could not penetrate the steel casing of his inherited anger. And crucially, I would not survive a second life of subservience, nor would I interpose myself between him and his wife. When you try to stand between them, the force of the blow inevitably lands on both. My only viable option was to leave alive. I got up, washed my face, and studied my reflection. The woman with the graying hair stared back, her eyes holding not lingering fear but a cold, fragile hardness, like a deep crack running across glass on a bitter, frosty morning. You could see the damage, but the structure was still holding. In the gleaming kitchen, I put the kettle on, cooked the oatmeal, and set the table with practiced precision. Everything was routine, as if these small domestic rituals could magically hold the collapsing house together. My hands performed the simple mechanical tasks while my mind was already racing miles ahead. Where to go, how to execute this, what exactly to say, what to pack, what to abandon, who needs to be told. The phrase, senior living community, a concept that used to flood me with embarrassment, implying a failure of family duty, now sounded level, solid, and utterly reassuring, like the name of a reliable train station. Marcus emerged first, looking fresh, composed, and utterly immaculate, behaving as if the brutal events of the night had never occurred. Simone followed a short while later, reserved, her eyes immediately cast down. On her temple, a faint yellowish streak, hastily covered by makeup, was visible. I felt my voice emerge from deep within my chest, soft yet uncompromising, the voice of a seasoned teacher who can halt an unruly class with a single quiet sentence. I sat opposite them, placed my palms flat and firm on the polished tabletop to ensure they wouldn't tremble, and looked up. "Children," I began, allowing a small, deliberate pause. "I have something important to tell you." I waited again, feeling the reassuring pressure of my palms on the wood. "I thought all night. I am moving to a private assisted living community." At first, they merely stared at each other, as if convinced they had misheard the words. Marcus regained his voice first. His face instantly blotched with angry color, and his voice turned metallic and cold. "What do you mean, moving? Why? You have your own son. You have everything you need right here. Do you want people to gossip that I abandoned my mother? Absolutely not. I forbid it. This is my life," I answered calmly, meeting his gaze. "And these are my final years. I intend to spend them in a way that provides me with ease and peace. You and Simone will have more freedom, and I will have quiet. This is my decision." He pursed his lips into a tight line, drumming his fingers on the table's surface like a frustrated child tapping a lid, and stared right through me as if I were nothing more than empty space. Simone, however, looked up sharply, as if she had been physically pushed into action. "Mom, if I offended you somehow, please don't leave," she pleaded, her voice trembling faintly. "You have absolutely nothing to do with this, sweetie," I said, reaching out to touch her hand gently. The city simply doesn't suit my temperament. The community is like a resort now. They have book clubs, chess tournaments, a lovely garden. You can both visit me on the weekends. That will be more than enough for me. Marcus continued to argue, cycling through the same predictable points. The shame, the damage to his professional reputation, how he had already meticulously arranged everything. I listened in silence, letting his argument exhaust itself, and then I repeated firmly, "I have decided." In my voice was the same non-negotiable firmness that children recognize in their mothers when they understand that further argument is utterly futile. By lunchtime, the matter was settled. He took charge, calling the expensive facility on the city's outskirts himself, arranging a room and ordering a private car. He maintained a distant, business-like demeanor, like a manager swiftly solving a logistical problem, not a son seeing off his mother. I packed my small suitcase, the few dresses, 2 books, the album. At the threshold, I paused and looked back. The apartment was impeccably beautiful, everything gleaming and expensive, but the atmosphere was sterile and cold, like a vast winter train station lobby. I looked at my son. Nothing of the laughing boy in the photographs remained on his face, only a cold, hard shell. I looked at Simone. She was pale, slender, standing perfectly still by the door. Her gaze was that of a person who has internalized the devastating lesson that she has no right to speak. I offered her a slight, private nod, a silent promise. "Hold on." She immediately dropped her eyes. The assisted living community welcomed me with its reassuring straight pathways, predictable routines, and consistent, gentle care. There was no shouting. Doors never slammed. And most crucially, at 3 o'clock in the morning, absolutely no one turned on a shower. My day settled quickly into a structure. Mornings involved light exercise, followed by breakfast with my new acquaintances, and then the library, where the lamps glowed softly under green shades. Afternoons were spent in the garden, sitting on a sturdy bench, feeling the warm, uncomplicated sun on my shoulders. Oddly, my body quickly accepted the quietude. My soul, however, remained restless. The moment I closed my eyes, the dry, sharp sound of the slap across Simone's cheek, cutting through the water's roar, surfaced violently from the deep, dragging everything with it. My own old bruises, the thick makeup that covered them, the desperate internal whisper of "just don't let the child hear," and the image of Simone, soaked, with wet hair held brutally by my son like a set of reins.